Welcome to the UP Notable Books Club, brought to you by the Upper Peninsula Publisher and Authors Association. Phyllis Wong is a native of the San Francisco Bay Area and would follow her father's sage advice of listen, talk little, listen, in her roles as a historian, educator, including as a writing instructor and director of online learning, and 30-year member of the university-level academic world, including as First Lady at Northern Michigan University, 2004 to 2012. And San Francisco State University, 2012 through 19. Among her favorite First Lady accomplishments is co-founding a One Book, One Community, county-wide reading program at NMU.
For those of you who don't know me, I'm Evelyn, and it's nice to see you all. And Phyllis, nice to see you. Nice to have you with us.
Nice to be here.
In a few moments is going to be talking to us about, and I got to say, Phyllis, what a beautiful cover. You know,
yes.
I know you can't judge a book by a cover, but really, you can't read all books. You need something to go by. This cover is gorgeous. It's just beautiful. And yeah, with the corset in the background and the pink that was used, I think, mostly in this lingerie, and just a real smart, clever cover. So she'll be talking to us just a moment. But I always like to turn us over to Victor, and he gives us some things that we need to know about. So take it away, Victor Volkman, the sponsor of these book talks. For those of you who don't know, the library pays for half, and UPPAA pays for half. And our speakers get a little stipend for talking to us. And we're real lucky because Victor's found some leads for grant money that might cover up some of the cost, which I've been working on, Victor. I haven't told you that, but I am working on that.
Great. I was afraid to ask because I know you're so busy.
Yeah, but I have not forgotten, Victor, because, you know, nothing excites me more than free money.
On that happy note, I'll take it away. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the current president of UPPAA, or UPPAA as you prefer. I'm going to talk a little bit about our spring conference, which is happening in Marquette on Saturday, June 10th, 2023, and it's absolutely free for anyone who's a UPPAA member, or if you're just a member of the general public, you're a writer, you're interested in writing, you can come to. You can come for $40. It includes the whole day. We have an amazing keynote speaker who's going to sing a song about Bigfoot. Yes, it's Marty Achatz, the poet laureate of the UP. So we'll be starting off with a rousing keynote speech. And so we have breakout sessions for all writers, wherever you are in the writing journey. I'll give you some examples here. Terry Martin, who's on here tonight, she's going to talk about how to use humor in your writing, no matter what type of writing you're doing. A little humor can always help. We have Tyler Tischler, the former president of UPPAA, who's going to be talking about self-publishing for those of you who've written something and you just want to take it on yourself. We'll have Brandy Thomas will be with us. She has narrated all of the audiobooks for the UP Reader. She's a trained audio and video engineer, and she will be preparing this recording for the archives. It will be on YouTube forever. She has amazing, talented person. We'll have Carrie Pearson. We'll be talking about how to work with an illustrator if you're putting together a children's book. We have Laura Smith from Calumet, who's a professional book cover designer. She'll be passing on all of her secrets on what makes a great book cover. And we have an exciting panel of 3 booksellers from around the UP. They're going to talk about how authors can be more effective in working with bookstores. So once again, if you're interested, head on over to our website, UPPAA.org. And the first thing that shows up on the screen will be information about the conference. You can click online, register online, pay with your credit card. If you don't want to pay online, you can mail us a check. It's a once in a year chance to experience all of the professionals, writers, and authors around the UP. We may have as many as 100 people, and includes a free hot lunch. So doesn't get any better than this, folks. All right, thanks, Evelyn. Back to you.
Well, thank you, Victor. That sounds like a really nice day. You know, of course, I'm partial because I know Terry and I've read one of her books. I can't wait to read the others. And her, you know, we talked about the home wind. Was that last month, right, Terry?
You're correct, yes.
And it is a great book. You do use humor really well. So that should be an interesting segment. Carrie Pearson wrote many books, but one is, you know, very beautiful. And we I applied for some grant money, and we here in Crystal Falls bought that book she wrote about trees. We bought a copy for every, I think it was first and second grader at Forest Park. So that was really neat. And she came to talk to the kids about her book, very professional lady. And of course, Tyler Tischler, his work is amazing. If anybody's listening out there and you have not read his Superior, what is it called? The Superior Trilogy, Victor?
Yeah, the Marquette trilogy.
Oh my gosh.
Actually 6 books long, so it's a really big trilogy.
Yeah. But you can't, I mean, my mom met Tyler at a craft show, bought that first book. And I mean, you just can't put it down. It's really stellar work, a wonderful author. So sounds like a great day there, Victor. I think hopefully you'll have a good turnout. And Phyllis, I don't know about the rest of you. How many of you, if you read the book, did you like it? Okay. I mean, I loved it. I thought it had really, I never knew about this Ishpeming lingerie. And I was shocked to find out how many people don't know about it. And I was surprised about the few people who did know about it. I mentioned it to my father, and it was so funny. He's like, yes, I know about it. They were advertising for machinists back in the 60s. And he and a friend went up there and then realized they were looking for women machinists. And it was for lingerie. So, I mean, even he had a story to talk about. So so neat to see that, you know, you've got this, you know, I think more and more, you know, with the Me Too movement and everything, more and more women's stories are being told. We're finding more and more out about women and what women have done and how they've contributed. And I mean, your book is really, it's a big part of that canon. So just getting the word out to people is amazing. So I can't wait to hear more. Take it away, Phyllis. Tell us all about We Kept Our Towns Going, the Gossard Girls of Michigan's Upper Peninsula.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Evelyn, Victor, and UPPAA. I now know how to pronounce the acronym for it. I've been listening. For hosting tonight's book discussion. I would also like to thank the staff and faculty from Northern Michigan University and also San Francisco State University for their support over the past decade. I was lucky, truly lucky, to meet so many Gossard workers, almost 100 women and some men, and to listen to their stories, to hear how Gossard girls impacted their towns economically, politically, socially, at a time when expectations of what single and married women could and should do was quite different then from what it is today in 2023. Most assuredly, their stories illuminate a poignant time in local, state, and I would also say national history. This is a local story, but this is also a national story. On behalf of the Gossard girls, I say thanks to those who are here tonight to participate in tonight's book discussion. The first thing I'd like to do, let me close this window up here, is to draw your attention to the image that you see on the screen. It's an image that is emblematic. I use it because it's emblematic of many of my experiences in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, where I lived for over 8 years. If you look closely, and please use your imagination, you can see a crude outline made of water of the Upper Peninsula in this ancient rock formation on Presqu'île. During one of my trips to Marquette for work on my manuscript, I met a stranger while walking on black rocks at sunrise in the dark before the sun even rose. We chatted about our mutual interest in the area's inspiring beauty, and she filled me in on what's going on in Marquette. At one point, she drew my attention to what you see in the middle of this image here, the water image depicting the Upper Peninsula. We didn't exchange names, yet I will never, ever forget our sunrise conversation. All righty, let's see here. All righty, so let's try this. I'm trying to advance it, Victor.
Try the page down or right arrow.
Okay, I'll try the page down. Now I'll try the right arrow. Oh.
Make sure it's the active application, so you might need to click on PowerPoint again.
Oh, there we go. There's the second one. It was sleeping for a while. So the first thing I'd like to talk about tonight, which the book addresses because it addresses through the voices of the women, is the economic impact. I cannot emphasize it enough, and I actually will spend a bit of time talking about their economic impact. What you see is a 1925 group photo of the women and some men, the Gossard workers. It was a summer picnic. You can get a sense of the economic impact just by looking at the sheer numbers, okay, the sheer numbers. 2 years after this photo was taken in 1927, there were over 400 wage and salary workers. And you can see there what the monthly payroll was. And if you inflated it for today's numbers, what it would mean in Ishpeming today, it's rather large. But just imagine for a moment, each one of you, that you are one of the workers. And there you are at the picnic, all these people. And think about what you did with your wages, how you helped your area and your family. One woman that I spoke to remembered and said, I went to work because I wanted to help my family. Lila said, I brought groceries with my money. And Shirley had another kind of story. She said, my father, a miner, died in an accident. So my mom cleaned houses. That wasn't enough. So she had to also work. Where did these workers come from? Oh, lots of places. Ishpeming, Nagani, Michigami, Ishpeming Township, Nagani Township. And then out further, those of you who know where Rock is, the small community of Rock. Even Marquette, people would come from Marquette. And then when the Gwyn plant opened in 1947, then workers came from Palmer and Gwyn and Little Lake and New Swansea, all those unincorporated places. One of the women who ended up working in the Ishpeming factory said to me, she worked in the 1940s during World War II. She says, quote, it was the only
we're not
place.
self-reflective. We might do things that did have a negative outcome or because our behavior.
All right. Are we okay now to continue? Okay. All righty. She said it was the only place in town where you made good money. I lived in town where stores were anchored in one next to the other. If you've ever been to Ishpeming lately, it looks quite different from what it looked like in the 40s. Elizabeth said it was a heyday in Ishpeming. It was quite well known in its day. There were loads of grocery stores, including A.W. Myers stores, Leflor's, Koski, many grocery stores, and many, she said, were ethnic grocery stores. Back then, she said, people kind of tended to lean toward their ethnic background. That's the way it was back then. So in lunchtime, these workers that you see here would have had an hour off and they would have gone down. They might have had lunch downtown, spent their money with that. They might have done some shopping. They might have walked for exercise. They also might have gone into a clothing store and bought some things. All right, let's see if I can advance this again. There we go. All righty. This is an especially important photo for me to share with you. It's not in the book. There are a lot of photos that are not in the book. But what it is it gives you a sense of the undergarment factory in Ishpeming. This is Ishpeming's. It was a 4-story building, and 2 of the floors were devoted entirely to assembling of undergarments, corsets, girdles, bras, one-piece foundations. you can have a sense of the size of the building there as you look at it. And you can see that workers are lined up in rows, but when you look there, they're lined up, they're in what they used to call departments. So maybe there might be 20 women, 10 on each side facing each other that were in seaming. Maybe next to them might have been the narrow binding, the medium binding. So you get the idea, because this was an assembly line process, then they would be lined up so that the garments, the assembly of the garments would move along from one piece rate worker, say in seaming, to the next one who might be in wide binding. I know a lot. This book tells a lot about, chapter 2 is really good about explaining how the factory worked. I learned about it. I was a good student of Elaine Peterson, who worked in at least 10 different areas. Her story is quite fascinating. She said she worked side by side with women. She supervised women, and she worked side by side with men. She was one of the rare women who had worked in just so many areas of the factory. She said at the end, I learned the inner workings of the undergarment assembly environment, a place where one had to be there to comprehend and value the complexity and intricacies of the undergarment plant. I'd like to take a moment and toss out the question that there are things that you don't see in this picture. I think this is a posed picture. What don't you see? What don't we know? Well, what we don't see and we can't hear is that it was a very noisy environment. Machines were going loud, strong. It was very warm there because the machine's motors were going for about 5-6 hours a day with hundreds of machines going. We also don't see in here the oil drums where women would go in the mid-morning to get oil so that they could oil their machines. We also don't see power boxes that were on the walls where a mechanic would had control of all of the power to the machines and would turn them on and off as needed, especially they went off during lunchtime. We also don't see, again, this is a lovely photo, but we don't see bundles, these canvas bags that the women were given so that they could pull their unassembled garments out and begin to work on them. We also don't see any male workers here. The mechanics were one of the largest of the male workers there. There were many of them because, again, there were many machines and they had to keep working and keep things going. And the men also sharpened scissors. It's not easy to see in this picture, but one of the women told me some of the chairs were different and they were very uncomfortable. And so workers would bring cushions to sit on, and then it was much easier to work 6 hours a day. Another worker, Cecilia, said to me, Phyllis, this is a competitive environment. The woman sitting next to me, she's trying to make more money than me. Another woman who worked, say, in the 60s, why? Because she wanted to buy furniture for her house. She was a very fast piece rate worker. She said, I held my snippers, and that was her name for scissors, in a certain way, and then I could make way above the rate. And Anita, who worked in the Gwyn factory in 1947, said, I never liked the timers. They made me nervous. And if I were going to come and stand by me, I told them to move far away. So some more images of what piece workers had, what made up their life. Wages, the workers were paid once a week on Fridays. And here you have a sense of what the pay stub would look like. This was Anita's pay stub. So this particular time in 1960, she didn't make much money that week. She said to me, I probably wasn't very good in the mood that week, so I didn't make much money. Down below are 3 important images. So I referenced earlier that workers would have received a canvas bag called a bundle, and attached to that bundle was a tag. It was a cardboard-like tag, and on it, as you can see on the left-hand side, were information about the contents of the bundle. In this particular image was that we have to imagine, and this is a hand-drawn tag, compliments of Elaine. To make this garter belt, it was about 8 steps. And piece workers could see, if I was a seamer, I would look at the bottom, and that would be how much I was paid to finish up, say, maybe a dozen or 2 dozen. And then at the end of the day, the piece worker would snip that off and attach that receipt, I'm going to call it a receipt, to something called a sticky, which really had another place where they put their information, their name, their employee number, and they glued it onto that piece of paper, and then they clocked out at the end of the day. And the office people would then tabulate the earnings, because sometimes we're all human. Sometimes we make mistakes when we add up things. So the office people would double check that. And then on the right-hand side, there's a picture of a Singer oil can that I referenced earlier, and a pair of scissors. Every Gossard worker had to have a pair of scissors. They could either buy one from the company, or they would go out and purchase one themselves. And piece workers, they were the largest number of workers at the factory in Ishpeming and also in Gwyn. Once a week, they would need to have their scissors sharpened. And then in the upper right is a picture of a dues card in 1949 after the strike. Everyone was a member of the union. And down below is just an example of one of many sewing machines that the Gossard girls worked on. Let's see here. Most of my talk today is about the women, but I would like to mention the men, because without the men cutting the material, fixing the machines, it'd be pretty hard for the women to be as successful as they were. One man, Bob Seeler was his name, was a sewing machine mechanic. He was experienced in repairing different sewing machine models. But he said to me one day when I interviewed him, he said, "Phyllis, I always said that to work at the Gossard, you had to be a psychiatrist. You had to listen. Sometimes listening wasn't easy, but many times it was." Here's another slide which gives you again a sense of the economic assets that the women were, broken down in 2 different periods, and I got the information from the Mining Journal. And you get, again, it gives you a sense of the awesomeness of the impact that the women had in a place where even in the 40s and the 50s, it was the 2nd largest business in Ishpeming. Imagine that. You are a member of a business that is the 2nd largest. You're a woman. You actually have status in the community because of what you are doing. Your downtown is thriving in Ishpeming as well as in Gwyn. And I think the last image that I want to show you that has to do, again, support what the women said, is that, you know, they were economic assets. They kept the town going. In fact, the name of the book, the title of the book, "We Kept Our Towns Going," is an actual quote from a couple of the women I interviewed. So in 1962, as you can see, Republican gubernatorial candidate George Romney campaigns in Ishpeming at the factory. This was in the Milwaukee Journal. I received a copy of this from Elaine Peterson, the woman who had every step that she walked in that factory. She recalled the day that Mr. Romney campaigned. And Elaine said to me, she giggled when she said that. She said, "Imagine that. He came to a factory where we're unionized. Imagine that. He came to a factory where a lot of people were Democrats. And here he is, a Republican." But she knew, Elaine knew how powerful and what a draw it was for those in politics to come and to see for themselves what the 2nd largest factory in Ishpeming and the largest women's business factory in the UP, I might add, the impact of such a place. Okay. We now talk about the women making a political, what I call a political impact. Beginning in 1941, the International Ladies Garment Workers Union came up to the Upper Peninsula. They were interested in unionizing small factories. Oddly, they had no idea in 1941 that there were over 500 workers in Gossard undergarment factory in Ishpeming. So you can imagine the attention that the union people bestowed on the women in this particular factory. As you can see there, it was a long time until it became a union shop. And there are a lot of reasons for that. And the book, chapter 4 in the book, does a pretty good job of trying to get at what some of the issues were. It was not easy for me to find people who knew a lot about this particular time in history, and some actually who really, they weren't pro-union. So it wasn't easy to talk about, for them to talk about. But as you can see there, it took 8 years, and it required buckets of courage, patience, determination to overcome fear, intimidation, power struggles, and yes, money. You might have read in that particular chapter about how there was a period in which some of those who were pro-union were a little bit annoyed because they felt that someone was getting more money than someone else. But in 1948, workers had another campaign, and they voted yes that they wanted a union shop. They couldn't, the company could not agree with what the union people were asking for. And so that's when a strike was called in April, a 4-month strike. So imagine in 1949, there's also a slowdown in the mines. Many miners are out of work. And we all know that mines and logging are the two main industries in the Upper Peninsula in this particular time period. And yet, in April, lots of them were out of work. So what happens? Well, the ILGWU comes in and spends about $5,000 a week to help support those workers who were willing to picket. What you see in front of you are some women who had a fun time, because this was serious business, but they also knew how to have fun, like wearing undergarments on the outside and having games and singing songs and doing what they needed to do to support each other so the collective of them could be strong for 4 months. And then as what happened, they did get a union shop. It was interesting. I did get some of the women did talk about what it was like to be an organizer, to participate, to be a picketer. One woman who was an immigrant from Belgium, and her English skills, even when I interviewed her in 2008, it wasn't easy to understand her. But she said to me then when she talked to me, my husband was laid off. He was a miner. If I agreed to picket, my husband and I could eat free meals above Woody's bar. So if you agreed to picket 2 hours a day, then you had support. So you could have meals. If you didn't have enough money to pay the electrical bill, if you didn't have enough money to buy groceries, you could go before a grievance committee where Elaine Peterson was one of those 8 people and make your case. And then you would have help. Imagine what that meant to women who, some of them initially were not pro-union, but as Denise said, we needed to eat. We will picket. You did what you had to do. One woman, Rose Collick, she is in the book. There's a lovely biography of her in the book. was not working at the Gossard. She was a new mother, but she lived across the street from the building. So during the strike, she gave the women permission to hang out in her garage so they could watch who was going in and out of the building. Rose believed in unions. She wasn't a worker there then, but she believed in them. So to the company's credit, they believed in the importance of social activities, of getting to know one another. They endorsed many, and they sponsored a number of activities, even in the factory itself and outside. What you see there is another photo of a summer picnic. There were many summer picnics. Probably they were discontinued in about the mid-50s after the union came in. But just take a look at all of the workers that you see in front of you there. In the bottom left of the screen there, you can see a man with a white hat. That's Chef Maloney. There was in the basement, a cafeteria where women were fed free meals 5 days a week. And then again, after the union came in, that was discontinued. But for many of the women, again, many women who had to work, not having to pay for a lunch every day in the 40s was a huge saving. It bolstered their income. They made more money. They were deeply appreciative of it. In addition to picnics, which were actually day-long affairs, there's in the book, there's a discussion about and a description of what happened during a regular picnic. 3 meals a day, there was dancing, there was games. One year, there was a Miss Gossard competition. So the company really understood the importance of bringing workers together to nurture relationships and to be, obviously, also to be, want to keep coming back to the Gossard. It worked. There were bowling. The Gossard company sponsored bowling teams. Margie Kettler talked with great pride, and she brought me a photo of herself in her bowling uniform that was bought by the Gossard. They went down to the Milwaukee area and played in the nationals, well, the state championships, and had a great time. So there, the company was quite generous by our standards, okay, quite generous. Okay, so I've talked a bit about Margie Kettler. She is an amazing, amazing woman, and you can see some of the things about her. I'd like to read to you parts of her story that are not in the biography. She was a great storyteller, and she was very forthright with talking about what she did and what it meant to her. So I'd just like to read to you a portion. She was one of the founders of a special group called the Golden Age Club. And this club began when the Gossard factory closed in 1976, permanently closed in 1976. The Golden Age Club was a social club and open to all former Gossard employees. The structure and division of labor remained unchanged for almost 30 years. That's how long they kept meeting. Rose was the president, and Evelyn held the position of treasurer and secretary. Rose assumed the bulk of the work for the monthly meeting. She'd select the meeting sites, write monthly agendas, run the meetings, and she ordered food and made coffee for the membership, which in the beginning was over 100 people, okay? When it closed, it was probably about 10 in 2008, I think. Every meeting began with a flag salute and followed by singing of God Bless America. Club members ate lunch, usually pasties, from Ralph's Italian Deli on Highway 41 or Tino's, a family restaurant in Negaunee. Of course, a portion of club meetings were spent on friendly games of bingo, where winners received a modest prize, 25 cents. Rose willingly assumed the position, but she wanted to give it up. She was tired of doing it. As the leader, she often had to listen to what members thought she ought to be doing. Rose said to me, they thought sometimes I wasn't doing things right. For example, one woman didn't want her to have members say the Pledge of Allegiance and sing a song. How Rose handled this exchange, Rose told her, well, if I want to sing that song, I'll sing that song. At another time, another thing that the club members did was each year they donated money to the Salvation Army in Ishpeming. Well, one club member was disturbed and cautioned her not to send any more checks, write any more checks for the Salvation Army, because she said that the members there, the people who worked at the Salvation Army, spent it on themselves, that they would take a trip. Well, Rose didn't have any way of verifying the authenticity of the story, but as a good leader and as someone who had to think on the spot, she came up with a really good idea. What she said was that in lieu of a check, she would give the Army a gift certificate from the grocery store. Then they could buy groceries and fill up the baskets for those people who needed. Club members agreed with her idea, and so that's what they did. And then one final thing that Rose was in charge of was every year she arranged for an all-expense-paid Christmas party at a local party. Now, mind you, these are women that are retired, right? They're on a fixed income. How did she do it? Rose. Take charge woman, that's all I can say about her, and a principled person at that. So what she did was she would write to the International in Chicago, the offices there, and request to have something sent for a party. Did she know about other people doing this? No, this was simply Rose's idea. Why would she want to do that? Well, I asked her about that, and she said, well, you know, she reasoned that the Gossard girls paid union dues when they were working, and so it seemed reasonable to ask for union support. Whether the union thought in similar terms is not known. Nonetheless, Rose said they didn't mind. They offered it to us. So I took it. Rose was grateful. Quote, they were nice to us. She was a pretty amazing woman, the eldest of 11 siblings, who sort of took charge her whole life. The other person I'd like to tell you a little bit about is Pauline Toivonen. There's just a small bit about her in the book. There was many things I had to keep out of the book because, you know, that's the way it is when you engage a press. You know, you can have so much that you can write. But I guess what I want you to think about is this is a woman who was self-described. She was shy. She was just very shy. But in 1946, she managed to get a job at the Gossard. It was very intimidating, she said. And the stairs were creepy. The stairs at the Gossard are extra wide. You have to imagine 10 women coming down the stairs together, these long stairs, going up in the morning and coming down. They are worn-looking stairs. But Pauline said that, you know, even though she was shy, I slowly got to meet those sitting around me. And she said, but I held back just a little. She told me about the time that she wasn't paying attention and she caught a needle got stuck in her fingers 3 ways, 3 times. And there in those days, you didn't go to the hospital emergency room. You sat in your chair and someone tried to pull the needles out. And if they got them out, they bandaged you up and you went right back to the your assembly line and you continued working. She said, I almost fainted when I saw all of those broken needles in my finger. Now, this shy person in 1949 agreed to be one of the picketers. I was intrigued by this because she talked frequently about being a shy person. So Pauline agreed to join the picketers. She said, in 3 years, I got to know some of the girls even more. I was less timid. She was only 20 at the time, actually. And she said, I was only 20. I was young. And I got caught up with the strike, like other women did too, the young ones especially, they would go along and just do things. The third issue, though, was far more important in 1949. It was economics, a reason why she agreed to be a picketer. She had recently married and she and her husband were living with her family. But her husband, Marvin, and her stepfather were laid off from the mines. They were not working, and her mother was not working. Pauline would have to help out, and she did. So she was a picketer 2 hours a day. When I asked her, I said, well, what did you have to do? And she said, well, you had to be out there in force, just like you see on TV, to be a little noisy. Try to state your point and sing songs. But Pauline, who was very shy, said she witnessed a lot of unpleasantness and combativeness and name calling and hurt feelings between friends. She said these were complicated and stressful times, but we managed, we made it. The other fun thing I wanted to tell you about Pauline was about her Aunt Bone. In 1920, actually, Pauline's mother worked at the Gossard factory just a very brief time, but also her aunt worked there in 1920. And she, Helen, and 2 other Gossard workers in the Ishmael plant were asked to travel to Australia to help set up a Gossard factory. Now imagine that in 1920. How do you get from Ishmael to Australia? Well, she had to take a train down to Chicago, hop on another train all the way to the West Coast, into the Bay Area, San Francisco, hop on a steamer, and then find her and the other 2 people their way to Australia. I don't know how long her aunt stayed there. She did return to the UP, and when she did return, Pauline was thrilled because she brought back some gifts from Australia, including a boomerang that Pauline has up on her wall in memory of her aunt. Her aunt also, too, was a woman who liked to tell fortunes and did tell fortunes in her day, even told the fortune for Pauline, which Pauline says, well, everything she said came out true, including the time when Pauline lost her first child. So working at the Gossard was very, very important to Pauline. She learned to be less shy. She also learned that hundreds and hundreds of women turned out to help Ishmael's economy. They were like her. They spent their paychecks locally. They bought dresses and goldies and pennies and style shop. They ate, they danced. Pauline loved to dance. They would go to the supper club, the Venice, the 41 Steakhouse. Pauline said to me, it was our patronage that kept the businesses going. What do we have here for time? 44. I will go through this quickly. So I didn't have a chance, but there is in the book, the quilts. There are a lot of quilt stories about that preserve history. This particular quilt that you see in front of you right now is a very special quilt because it memorializes an aunt who had a very, very difficult upbringing and actually left home during the Depression, married and came back with her husband. And the only way they could get back was to ride the rails. They lived in a very modest wooden shed, no running water, no heat. It was a difficult time, but the good news is that Aunt Marie would end up working at the Gwynn factory, making money and living a good life. So this particular quilt is important to the 2 sisters who talked to me about why they could never, ever get rid of this quilt, why it is so important to them. And then one woman, she didn't work at the factory, but her aunts and her mom worked on a doll quilt. They made this from extra remnants. Can you see the detail work in it? And so today, this doll quilt is actually in the museum in Marquette, but it's a tribute to the women who used extra material to make fun things and used everything they could. I'd like to end by just giving you an idea of some of the women, some of the people that worked at the Gossard, ordinary people, strong people, resourceful people, wonderful people who kept their towns going. Thank you.
Thank you, Phyllis.
If there are any questions, I would love to hear some questions or queries.
Oh, thank you. This is just fascinating, and the work that you did with it. Wonderful.
Phyllis,
Yes.
if you can stop screen sharing, then we can all see each other better.
Okay,
Yes.
sure. All righty. So, all right, Victor, take me through that. Stop screen sharing.
Evelyn,
Yes,
where's the stop screen share?
I think on the top. If she presses up on the top, I
It
think
says-
there's a way where she can,
I'll say pause share.
Yeah, try that.
It says pause. That's not helping you, is it?
oh, or
Okay.
is it on the bottom where it says share screen? There we go. There, you did. You did it.
Okay. All righty, here we go.
Okay, that way we can kind of see each other a little bit better.
Sure.
Phyllis, I was wondering, is the picture you had of the women in the large room making the garments, was this one building or did they have other buildings? Because I'm assuming they, with that many employees, they had to have a warehouse and all of that. And then you mentioned they had a cafeteria. So what are we talking about in terms of size? Was it in the, no, I'm not that familiar with this. I mean, so where would the, buildings have been at that time?
So everything was contained in one building. It was 4 stories. It originally was, before it got renovated in 1904, it was a huge department store called the Brasted. So it took up an entire block. And initially there were just 3 floors, but they added a 4th floor in the 40s. So when garments were done and ready to be boxed and shipped out, then a truck would come and pick up all of the things, and things would get trucked down to Chicago area where the warehouses were. But everything was done on site. You'd beginning at the top on the 4th floor, you'd have all of the cutting out of the materials and things like that. And then the 3rd and 2nd floor were the assembly ones putting things together. The 1st floor was typically boxing and shipping. And then the basement also was some, actually in the basement, there was a huge 2-ton machine that could collect, a hydraulic machine that cut out undergarments. So that was also down there, but everything was self-contained in one building.
Do we have any other questions out there for Phyllis? I've got one, but I want to hear if anybody else has one first.
I have one. Did
Go
they
ahead.
have, yeah, this is Sharon. Did they have treadle machines or electric?
That's a good question. In the beginning, there were some treadle machines, but as the technology advanced some, then they didn't use them anymore. But in the beginning, there were. And it's interesting, you should ask about treadle machines, because in those days, many people had treadle machines. So this was an adjustment, moving from a treadle machine at home to industrial machines in the factory that went super fast.
Thank you.
Yes.
When did Gossard start? I don't recall hearing that.
Well, I'm not sure how to answer your question. So in Ishpeming, but the company itself began in 1904. And then by 1920, the company was just doing super well and needed to expand even more beyond the factories they had in about 6 or 7 factories they had in the Midwest. And that's when they were enticed to come up to Ishpeming. There were factories in Canada, factories in Australia, and also a factory in London. And eventually, if you read the book, you will learn about in the 30s and 40s, the American company actually became a UK country, and it exists today. The company still exists today. Thank you for asking that question.
I have a question.
Yes.
This is Terry.
Hi, Terry.
I was just wondering, being that the Upper Peninsula, especially back then, was pretty remote. I just wondered about distribution of all these goods that they're cranking out, and how they got them to their destination.
That's a good question. So 3 days a week, a truck brought raw materials. The end of the day, they took back the assembled materials. So only by truck, not by train. I'm not sure why they never used a train. And all of that was trucked down to the warehouses. So it was this 3 days a week, and they would get materials from the Ishpeming one. And then in the 40s, late 40s, they also had to get finished materials from the Gwyn plant, which was much smaller, but nonetheless, they had to pick things up there by truck. So you can imagine that was pretty expensive. And you can think about the winters that the UP has, huh?
Yeah. And then no bridge until what, 1955 or 6? Did they ship them like to Wisconsin? Is that, or just?
Some of the warehouses were in, not Wisconsin, I think they were in Indiana. I'm kind of blanking on the exact locations of them. There was more than one warehouse, but they were centralized in the Midwest. And that's really where most of the factories, the Gossard factories, were located in America, in the Midwest. And they were located there for a very good reason. Well, it wasn't the big city, so you didn't have to pay big city prices to workers. So it really made sense to go into smaller communities. And, places like Ishpeming really benefited, and Gwyn benefited from them doing that kind of thing.
Phyllis.
Yes.
I'm dying to ask this question because I read your book cover to cover.
Yeah.
And I think what's really great about your book is you take us through, this whole story of this plant, and you're very diplomatic, Phyllis. You tell us about the company, and then you tell us about the union. And it's a big part of the book, and it's very interesting. And as I'm reading it, and I was a teacher, so I've been in a union. I also worked in the mines myself when I was going to college. So I have this sort of pro-union mindset. But then in the book, you kind of bring this other light to it, how the company was very good to these girls. And it did take 8 years to get it unionized because of. So Phyllis, if you're a Gossard girl, where would you have stood on this issue? Would you have wanted to join the union? Would you have wanted to stick with the company? Where would you be?
Yeah. I like your question. You're putting me on the spot. I like that.
Yes.
So, based on the number of stories that I heard from the women about what it was like when you didn't have a voice, when the manager looked you in the eyes and said, you will never earn as much money as a man. Or when he said, if you sign a campaign card, you're gonna have to leave. So if I'm going to be intimidated and nobody is sticking up for me, I want to find someone who's going to help me stick up for me.
Okay.
Sometimes models, when they brought in a new undergarment on inside, they lowered the prices. So I'm sure people here listening, if you were on the assembly line and you were getting, say, 25 cents for this one task that you did, and now you have the same model, but now they want to say, all right, we're only going to give you 20 cents. How do you think I know how I'd feel. I want to be valued. And maybe that's something that I don't know that the women ever use that word. It's the word that I used. When the employer, when your boss values you, then you're not going to be looking outside other places for someone to help find you help. You value people. And there was a time, and there is this tension between the company making money and workers wanting to make money. But you have to come to some kind of agreement, and you have to value the people that work for you.
Okay. Yeah, that's a great answer. And it was a neat part of the book for me because, you didn't spit out any opinion, you just kind of put it all out there, and it made me think. And I always like to think when I read a book, I like when the book makes my mind keep going, and yours did, so thank you for that. I enjoyed that.
It was kind of interesting. It was not, I thought it would be easy to write about women that I interviewed. Okay. I thought it would be, but actually I don't think it's that easy at all, because part of what we often do unassumingly is insert our own thoughts about what they meant. And there's a danger in that, a big danger. So I spent literally hours and hours on the interviews, writing them up in their words, and then trying to make sure that the words I used were not my words, but it were their words. It was not easy at all. But I take comfort because many of the women I've talked to, including Verna, a woman who is probably 107 years old today, this year, they read it carefully, and they saw that, their words were valued. What they said was valued. And that's what we want to do. We want to value people if we ask them to tell us stories.
Good advice.
Is there time for another question?
Yes.
Okay. Following up on Evelyn's question about unionization, I was
Yes.
when you interviewed the women, was there talk about the what we call the paternalistic company versus unions, and where I'm assuming there was probably some kind of split in the workforce, those who wanted to be and stay in the company because they thought that that was safe, and then the others who wanted to, were more brave, I guess you would have to say, and wanted to move ahead and not rely on the company, but rely upon their own efforts and through the union to be able to move ahead and make better wages.
Well, it's interesting, as I've been listening to you use the word paternalistic. It's not a term that they would have used. So oftentimes their reasons for being either for a union or not for the union sometimes were based on a husband or a family in which they were members of the union. Now, again, miners, the mines were unionized, so and many of these workers would have come from mining families, so they would have adopted. That's not a good word. Adopted is not the right word, but they would have followed what was the prevailing opinion in their family. Sometimes what is also interesting is that during the 8 years when they were trying to unionize and get a union in there, this was all done in secrecy, as those of you who are members of the union know, things were done in secrecy. And so they never even told their parents or even their best friends. And when parents did find out, those who talked to me said, well, they didn't care. They were fine with it. I think, again, fundamentally, the problem was that they were not being valued. The company was changing prices. Department heads were showing favoritism and giving their friends better bundles to work on where they would make more money. So again, I think it just boiled down to nobody, the company wasn't valuing them, and the union stepped up and said, we will. So they made a choice.
That's great. Were all the companies in the Midwest unionized by the Garment Workers Union?
No, I don't believe all of them were. The large ones were, for example, in Logansport and Huntingtown, those were unionized. I can't speak for factories that were outside of the United States, for example, in Drummondville or even Toronto, where I have no knowledge of that. And nor do I have knowledge of, there were factories in England up through the 70s, and I don't have any knowledge of that. But I would say the large factories were unionized. Ishpeming was probably the second largest one in the Midwest. Gwynn, with only about 150 workers there, was, never unionized. Well, actually, it was unionized when everything came down in 1949, but they did not want a union shop. They were very happy with the way things were in Gwynn. I have a very interesting time.
We're after 7 o'clock, so we got to kind of wrap it up here. But why did you write this book?
Why did I write the book?
Yeah.
Okay, sure. Okay. I wrote the book because I felt people needed to know this history. What these people did, what the women did, and some men, is something that needed to be told. It's nice because in Ishpeming was kind of this self-contained small city. So really you can get a sense of the power of we kept our towns going. A story like this, I don't see could have been as impactful in a Chicago or a New York City. But here you have this self-contained thing. Plus you also have, these are rural communities. And so they are doing what women are doing all over, but nobody knows about it.
Are you from Ishpeming, or how did you hear the story? How did you get the
good question. So I got to know about the women because I was doing a research paper on another well-known women in Marquette. I'm not from the UP. I have a little blood in me because I've lived there 8 years. But so I did a joint research paper on Geraldine Gordon DeFont. And some of you are nodding your heads. You may know of her. She was a woman from Chicago who came up to help unionize. And she became politically active in Marquette County, part of the Democratic Party. So in the process of doing a research project on her, I had to interview women who knew her.
Right.
And I very quickly said, I'm going to do this paper, but this is where I want to know more. I want to learn more. I was really, I was intrigued and impressed with what workers did. Yeah.
You know, one thing I have to say too, before I was the director here at the library, I was an English teacher for 24 years. And you do beautiful research. Like this is not easy stuff out there, people. And it's so well researched. It's so, you don't see this anymore. You did a good job.
Thank you. Thank you. I really wanted to demonstrate that I valued what people did. They told me stories. So how do I honor them? What do I do? I try to put together something that is worthy of
Yeah.
celebrating. And they're the ones who are celebrating, you know, I learned from them.
Mhm.
What they did was amazing. I
Yeah.
didn't make this up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, Victor, it's just, we couldn't have picked a better book to kick off year 4, could we?
It's an amazing piece of sociological study, and it could be a textbook for labor relations. There's so many ways this book can be used.
Mhm. Next week, I'm going to be a guest speaker at Clark University, where I live. And I'm going to talk to students in an oral history class. And I'm very, very excited to tell them about this wonderful story from the Upper Peninsula.
Well, that's great.
Yeah.
Yes, any good UP press is nice. And I'll tell you, so thank you everybody for coming on tonight. And Phyllis, I'm going to email you tomorrow because we need to get your physical address so we can send you some money. You know, because you did a lot of work here and we're so glad you talked to us tonight. Thank you. I think we all really learned a lot, and we'll see you guys next month.
Yeah. Thank you very much again to both of you, Victor and you, Evelyn, and to everybody who attended. I am honored for people to come and to hear about these people. Thank you.
It's a real good story. Thank you.
You've been watching the UP Notable Books Club, brought to you by the Upper Peninsula Publisher and Authors Association. To join or for more information, please visit us at www.upaa.org or www.upnotable.com.